Neanderthals are an extinct species of humans who lived approximately 40,000 years ago. Their extinction is attributed to a combination of factors, including disease, climate change, and competition with early modern humans. Despite the limited number of Neanderthals remains, ancient DNA was found in well-preserved dental plaque, which has provided significant insights into their diet, health behavior, and social and cultural practices. And were shorter and stockier than modern humans, a physical build that helped them adapt to colder climates before the onset of significant climate changes. Their robust physiques enabled them to stay warm and withstand harsh conditions. They also had adaptations such as special fat stores and large noses, likely resulting from genetic changes to help regulate their body temperature in cold weather. On average, Neanderthal males stood about 5 feet 5 in tall and weighed 165 pounds, while females were approximately 5 feet tall and weighed 132 lb. Neanderthal populations remained relatively small, though evidence suggests interactions with other human populations, including genetic mixing. Some researchers believe Neanderthals used multiple caves, seasonally moving between them based on weather conditions. Their lifespan was short, with many individuals dying by age 20 and only a few reaching 40 years old. This was likely exacerbated by their physically demanding and stressful environment. The story of Neanderthals reveals their resilience and adaptability, offering a glimpse into the lives of our ancient relatives, clothing, and adaptations. Neanderthal clothing practices were shaped by necessity. During summer months, they often went barefoot, while in winter they wrapped themselves in animal skins to stay warm. However, because clothing does not fossilize, direct evidence of their attire is scarce. It is believed that they skinned animals they hunted or utilized natural materials to shield themselves from the elements. For instance, modern Inuit people still hunt wolves for their fur, which does not freeze like other animal pelts. Neanderthals were primarily covered in long hair, reducing their need for clothing as they lost body hair. They adapted by wearing simple garments made from fur. During their time, nudity carried less societal stigma, reflecting the simpler and survival-focused mindset of their era. Gandal technology was surprisingly advanced. They were among the first to use tools made from bone rather than stone. A notable example is the lamasa tool, crafted from deer ribs, which was used for butchering animals and processing hides to create clothing. These tools marked a significant step in their technological evolution. Neanderthal diets varied based on regional and cultural differences. For example, the Spaniards and Danes from Belgium were predominantly carnivorous, hunting large game such as woolly rhinoceroses and wild sheep. On occasion, they consumed vegetables like native mushrooms, which are still eaten in Europe today. In Spain, the Linnean Neanderthals had a more vegetarian diet, consuming pine nuts, moss, tree bark, mushrooms, and habas plants. Using subterranean fires, they prepared soups, stews, and animal stocks, boiling bone marrow extracted from animal remains. Despite their high protein intake, their carbohydrate consumption was minimal. Neanderthals also smoked food, adding plant flavorings like chamomile to the smoke. This not only enhanced flavor but also preserved food for longer periods. Food preservation techniques included curing meat and storing surplus kills for future use. Evidence from Croatia and Belgium indicates that cannibalism was a part of Neanderthal life during periods of famine. Human bones show signs of defleshing with limbs removed and chest cavities emptied. Bones were also repurposed into tools and implements, reflecting the resourcefulness and survival strategies of Neanderthals, who were a remarkable species showcasing resilience and adaptability in a challenging environment through their physical traits, technological innovations, and dietary practices. They demonstrated an ability to thrive, even if only for a limited time, in the harsh conditions of prehistoric Earth language and communication. In 1971, P. Lieberman reconstructed the vocal tract of Neanderthals. Based on his research, he concluded that their vocal anatomy was comparable to that of a baby due to their large lips. Lieberman suggested that they were unable to produce certain sounds, leading him to believe they were incapable of articulated speech. Despite this, evidence suggests Neanderthals could communicate using various noises. The discovery of the Neanderthals' bone, a structure critical for speech in humans, revealed that their vocal capabilities were more advanced than previously thought. Although their speech may not have matched human dialects, They were capable of using syntactical language, which involves structuring words in meaningful orders. The complexity of their language likely varied across different civilizations and time periods, given that Neanderthals interbred with humans. It is plausible to argue that they were fluent in the survival-related language of their time. They would have primarily used terms relevant to their immediate needs, eliminating unnecessary words. In this sense, their language, like their tools and clothing, was shaped by necessity, exemplifying the adage that necessity is the mother of ingenuity. The stereotype of Neanderthals as knuckle-dragging cavemen is a widespread misconception. In reality, their survival skills were remarkable. Neanderthals were expert hunters of medium to large animals and utilized spears with stone tips during their hunts. These spears were likely employed at close range, held at short distances during ambushes. Given their eat-or-be-eaten existence, it is easy to imagine that they were highly skilled hunters. If you have ever thrown a javelin, you can appreciate the strength and precision required to ensure a successful throw. Neanderthals hunted in bands employing communal hunting techniques that allowed them to kill prey up close. They thrust their spears using an underhand motion, showcasing their adaptability and skill. Understanding this history is important, especially as many people today still possess Neanderthal DNA. Their survival instincts demonstrate how the need to adapt and innovate drives development. While there is still much to learn about Neanderthals, their legacy reminds us that all progress begins somewhere. The history of Neanderthals. Even though modern humans and Neanderthals are completely different species, did not stop the two from hooking up. We know for a fact that humans and Neanderthals had intercourse with one another, as revealed with DNA testing. A genetic analysis run on the remains of a 4,000-year-old human uncovered that 11% of his genome wasn't actually human but Neanderthals. It's the highest concentration ever found in a human there. Are there even people alive today who have remnants of Neanderthal in their genes? As it turns out, Neanderthals passed on certain genes that can cause ulcers to generate on human genitalia. People with the Neanderthal gene HLAB*51 are more likely to develop Bee's disease, a condition that has several side effects like ulcers on the mouths and genitalia. Inflammation and blindness. Beauty isn't the only condition linked to Neanderthal DNA. Crohn's disease, lipo, and diabetes are all ailments that are influenced by the remnants of ancient DNA. Neanderthals and modern humans differ in many ways, and one of the most severe differences is our perspective on relationships with close relatives. The female Neanderthal toe bone was discovered in a Siberian cave, and a genetic analysis uncovered that Neil's parents were actually close relatives. It's likely the parents were half-siblings, an aunt and her nephew, or vice versa. Scientists confirmed the level of inbreeding in this particular specimen was unusually high for any species, suggesting this was far from a fluke incident. Interbreeding between humans and Neanderthals was not an isolated occurrence, according to various DNA evidence. It appears this interspecies love affair was ongoing since at least 100,000 years ago. The two species mingled and mixed for an estimated 60,000 years, producing fertile offspring whose genetic lineage continues to this day. It is believed thousands of these couplings happened over the course of this timeline. This revelation actually revolutionized our knowledge of our own history and made it clear that Homo sapiens must have left Africa earlier than we thought, since Neanderthals never lived in Africa. Evidence of Neanderthal mixing proves humans migrated to Eurasia at least 100,000 years ago. Neand males were found to have members similar in size to our own. Unlike many other primates who have proportionally small male genitalia, humans have relatively large members. By comparing our DNA, scientists have determined that Neanderthals' penises were likely indistinguishable from our own. This makes sense given the amount of inbreeding between the two species and further confirms that our genitalia was compatible with theirs. The annals are gone, and paleontologists have spent decades trying to figure out what happened. Some theories put the blame on climate change, while others blamed human invaders for wiping out our closest relatives. There is another hypothesis floating around. It's possible the Neanderthals never actually died out but in fact just blended with us. They may have sexed themselves out of existence by mating with another species. Interspecies intercourse wasn't always consensual, it is highly likely. Sexual relations between humans and Neanderthals were not consensual, and interspecies rape was just another part of prehistoric life. Communication between the species would have been difficult, meaning it's unlikely that two hominids hooked up by choice. If this was the case, then it could be evident that humans and Neanderthals had a violent relationship, one that would end with humans as the sole survivors despite plenty of genetic evidence revealing many of the mysteries left behind by the disappearance of Neanderthals. We still don't know much about their actual personal lives. We do know they mingled with humans, but we're not sure under what conditions or exactly how often that happened. We don't know what the actual act might have looked like, although we can assume it would be fairly similar to modern human intercourse. Maybe with time we will learn more about the lives of Neanderthals before the early 2010s. Scientists were conflicted on the question of Homo sapiens interbreeding with Neanderthals, but since then, multiple studies have shown the incredible overlap between Neanderthal and human DNA, enough. Approximately 1% to 4% of modern human DNA traces directly back to Neanderthal ancestry. Neanderthals coexisted with modern humans for tens of thousands of years, and the two groups certainly met. Evidence shows that Homo sapiens not only procreated with Neanderthals, they also slew and ate them. It's not surprising that prehistoric humans mated with Neanderthals since prehistoric people were notoriously promiscuous, but while science proves humans mated with Neanderthals, the evidence still leaves some questions open. When did they begin to interbreed? Was it consensual? There's not a huge difference between prehistoric Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, it turns out. While Neanderthals were slightly stockier and had thicker bones, the two were compatible in many ways, according to a study published in Science. On average, up to 4% of a person's genetics trace directly to the Neels while the Neanderthals vanished. 30,000 years ago, the study provides solid genetic evidence that prehistoric Homo sapiens procreated with Neanderthals. Homo sapiens migrated from Africa in large numbers around 65,000 years ago. When they spread to the Middle East and Europe, Homo sapiens encountered Neanderthals. When the two hominids met, they also mated. Recent scientific evidence shows Homo sapiens and Neanderthals interbred multiple times, including early mixings that may have occurred over 100,000 years ago after small groups of Homo sapiens left Africa, interbreeding with likely Neanderthals, shaping the DNA of subsequent generations of scientists. Recently solved a prehistoric DNA mystery. How did Neanderthals, living in southwest Germany 100,000 years ago, have modern human mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA? As recently as 2010, scholars believed that interbreeding between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals likely only stretched back 60,000 years ago when Homo sapiens left Africa. Slowly, they spread to the Middle East and Europe, but research in 2017 shows that a female human in Africa met a male over 220,000 years ago. This coupling spread mana to an entire lineage of Neels, who may have met Homo sapiens in Europe tens of thousands of years later. Was mating between humans and Neanderthal consensual? Scientific data provides scant evidence on that question. However, one clue would come from examining exactly who was doing the procuring. Was it Neanderthal males impregnating human females or vice versa? Genetics researcher Adam Seal says all we really know is that some offspring of humans and Neanderthals eventually got incorporated into human populations. Because what we see are small fragments of genomes in human populations. Author Robert Sawyer takes a slightly darker view on consent. I wish I could paint a more romantic tale of candlelit dinners over mammoth steak, but it seems much more likely that the gene flow was mostly unintentional, or, in short, the groups didn't mate intending to cause pregnancy. One group of humans doesn't have Neanderthal DNA. Homo sapiens migrated around the world, sometimes mingling with other hominid species, but just one group of modern humans shows no evidence of interbreeding with Neels. Modern ethnic groups from around the world that carry Neanderthal DNA from interbreeding, except for people with solely African ancestry. Sub-Saharan Africans never interacted with Neanderthals, and thus didn't have a chance to mingle their DNA. Everyone else carries around 1 to 4% Neanderthal genes. Homo sapiens and Neanderthals most likely mated and fought each other, but the two groups might have been nearly indistinguishable when they coexisted in Europe and the Middle East. That's because Neanderthal DNA is almost identical to human DNA. Humans and Neanderthals shared 99.7% of their DNA. That makes Neanderthals much closer genetic relatives than chimps, who share 98.8% of their DNA with humans. In addition to the close genetic relationship, Homo sapiens and Neanderthals crossbreed, introducing additional Neanderthal DNA into the human genetic pool. Interbreeding with Homo sapiens might have been a bad idea for Neanderthals. The Neanderthal Y chromosome was not completely compatible with the human Y chromosome, and as a result, if a Neanderthal male procreated with a human female, the pregnancy would have frequently ended in a miscarriage. Population geneticist Fernando Mendes identified the mutations on the Neanderthal Y chromosome that would trigger an immune response from a human woman. If she became pregnant, the woman's immune system could have caused a miscarriage. In fact, the Neanderthals may have gone extinct. After intermixing with Homo sapiens and essentially becoming absorbed into their group, Homo sapiens and Neanderthals might have fought each other for 100,000 years as Homo sapiens tried to expand from Africa into Neanderthal territory in Europe and Asia. In November 2020, evolutionary biologist and paleontologist Nicholas R. Longrich said that although it's tempting to think the two groups might have gotten along, biology and paleontology paint a darker picture far from peaceful. Neanderthals were likely skilled fighters and dangerous warriors archaeologically. Evidence indicates that Neanderthals used spears to hunt big game, so they likely also used such tools to protect themselves, and both Neanderthals and Homo sapien prehistoric remains show signs of skull and upper body trauma. For example, a 40-year-old Neanderthal who lived in Iraq around 50,000 years ago was slain after a spear pierced him through the rib cage. Anthropologist Stephen Churchill demonstrated that the tool that took Shanidar III's life could have been a lightweight projectile spear. A Neanderthal jawbone discovered from a cave in southwestern France showed signs of cut marks from a stone tool, indicating the Neanderthal child was slain and eaten. Longrich said Neanderthals likely survived for 100,000 years despite the conquest because they were far more familiar with the terrain and had muscular bodies and large eyes that aided in close combat and dark lighting conditions. It's not clear why Homo sapiens eventually prevailed. Perhaps they developed better weaponry or hunting techniques. Why did Neanderthals go extinct while Homo sapiens flourished? Part of the answer has to do with the small size of the Neanderthal population between 38,000 and 70,000 years ago. The Neanderthal population in Europe was small, perhaps as few as 1,500 female Neanderthals of reproductive age in the twilight of the Neanderthals era. They were simply outnumbered by Homo sapiens. Researcher Adrien Briggs explains that there never really were millions of them. They probably were more susceptible to some event that made them go extinct, which to me suspiciously coincides with the emergence of modern humans. While Neanderthals and Homo sapiens diverged evolutionarily around 500,000 years ago, the two groups weren't that different. Homo sapiens edged out the Neanderthals slightly in height, while the Neanderthals boasted bigger and stronger bones. Neanderthals had larger brow ridges and bigger noses. Another similarity anthropologists commonly refer to is that Neanderthal penises probably looked a lot like human ones. Anthropologist John Hawks explains that most primates have horny pill or spines on their penises, but both humans and Neanderthals were missing the genes for these spines. Neanderthals weren't the only hominid that Homo sapiens interbred with. New research shows that Homo sapiens also mated with Homo erectus and Homo habilis, as well as with Denisovans, who populated much of Asia's modern people from Oceania and East Asia still carry fragments of Denisovan DNA. Dr. Michael Hammer says we think there were probably thousands of interbreeding events. It happened relatively extensively and regularly. Although prehistoric Homo sapiens interbred with other hominid species, Homo sapiens outlived their competition. Some scholars question the recent studies showing Neanderthals and Homo sapiens interbreeding. In a 2012 study, researchers precisely dated Neanderthals from southern Spain, discovering they predated the arrival of Homo sapiens in the area by as much as 10,000 years. However, it's possible Homo sapiens arrived in the area sooner than previously known. Others argue that the genetic similarities trace back to a common ancestor rather than coming from interbreeding, yet with modern humans showing up to 4% Neanderthal DNA and the lack of Neanderthal DNA in Africans interbreeding. Remains the current scientific consensus that their voices were shrill and grating. By looking at the trail of Neanderthals, scientists have determined that not only did they speak, but they did so using sounds that were comparable to those used by contemporary speakers. Neanderthals equipped with bigger voice boxes likely had vocal cords and a hyoid, the bone that supports one's tongue, that sit forward of where it sits in modern humans. The shape of a Neanderthal's vocal tract, rib cage, skull, and cavity increased the pitch and added power to their voice. Neanderthals lived hundreds of thousands of years ago. One of the many ancestors to modern humans, the species went extinct about 40,000 years ago, although it continues to live in the DNA of humans. Around the world, Neanderthals have long been thought of as unintelligent creatures who dragged their knuckles and wielded clubs. Reddit says otherwise, providing a lot of information to combat this negative view. The subreddit Today I Learned has offered some of my opening facts about Neanderthals, many of which may surprise you. Many false ideas about Neanderthals are widespread. One of the most common misconceptions is that they were stupid and rude. This belief, however, is untrue. The persistence of this stereotype has even led to the term Neanderthal being used as an insult to describe someone who is uneducated or unintelligent. At one point, Neanderthals were almost given the scientific name Homo stupidus. However, modern research has proven that Neanderthals were as intelligent as early Homo sapiens. This is just one of the intriguing aspects of Neanderthals. Let's explore more fascinating discoveries about them. Neanderthals walked upright. Neanderthals have often been misrepresented as slouched creatures with stooped backs resembling some sort of large ape. This depiction, however, is inaccurate. Neanderthals walked upright and may have had better posture than modern humans. The myth of the hunched Neanderthal originated with Mercelin Blay, who believed Neanderthals were a missing link between humans and apes. Modern research, including computer modeling of Neanderthal skeletons, has revealed that truth studies showed that their spines and necks had natural curves similar to those of modern humans. Further analysis of hip joints and the sacrum, a bone located between the hip bones, confirmed that Neanderthals maintained an upright posture, where marks on their skeletal remains provided additional evidence revealing they moved and stood in ways consistent with modern human anatomy. Neanderthal genes in non-African populations around 70,000 years ago, early Homo sapiens migrated out of Africa. During their journey into Eurasia, they encountered Neanderthals and interbred with them. This genetic mingling has left a legacy. Modern Europeans have Neanderthal DNA averaging about 2% of their genome, in contrast to sub-Saharan Africans, whose ancestors did not leave Africa, who have little to no Neanderthal DNA. This difference highlights the regional interbreeding that occurred as humans spread across the globe. Further, these encounters also involve Denisovans, another archaic human group, showcasing the complexity of early human relationships among all three groups. Homo sapiens Neanderthals are descended from Homo heidelbergensis, a common ancestor who lived between 500,000 and 600,000 years ago. Populations that migrated to Western Asia and Europe evolved into Neanderthals, while those heading to East Asia became Denisovans. The population that remained in Africa eventually developed into modern Homo sapiens. Theories about Neanderthal extinction. One controversial theory suggests early Homo sapiens may have hunted Neanderthals to extinction. Anthropologists such as Pa Benvenuto Martinez Naro have proposed that Neanderthals may have been preyed upon by humans as they moved into Europe. Evidence supporting this theory includes cut marks found on the animal bones similar to those made during butchery. Further, some researchers suggest Homo sapiens may have used Neanderthal teeth to make jewelry such as bracelets. However, skeptics argue that the jawbones and teeth could have come from the Neanderthals, who had already died, rather than being hunted. This theory aligns with the timeline of the Neanderthals' extinction, which coincides closely with the arrival of Homo sapiens in Europe. However, the idea remains contentious, with experts divided on whether Homo sapiens actively hunted Neanderthals or simply outcompeted them for resources. Neanderthals as artists, contrary to earlier assumptions, possessed artistic capabilities comparable to those of early modern humans. They created some of the world's oldest known cave art, approximately 65,000 years ago, before Homo sapiens arrived in Europe. Neanderthals used red pigments to paint ladder-like symbols on the walls of caves, and similar artworks have been found in 2 other Spanish caves. These discoveries provide compelling evidence that Neanderthals had cognitive skills, creativity, and the ability to symbolize, debunking the stereotype of them being primitive brutes. In 1856, the first fossil of a Neanderthal, a prehistoric human species, was discovered in the Napa Valley in Germany. The valley itself was named after Joachim Ninde, a 17th-century German minister and hymn writer who often took walks in the area. N's name was derived from the Greek word ninda, meaning new man. Over time, the name Neanderthal was adopted to describe this early human species in 1904. The H in thou, the German word for valley, was removed from modern German orthography because the language no longer used the th sound. However, in some languages the th remained, resulting in variations of the name. In 1864, William King proposed the name Homo neanderthalensis for this new human species. 2 years later, Ernst Haeckel suggested the alternative name Homo stupidus, meaning stupid man. Fortunately, the King's name was chosen, sparing Neanderthals from being labeled as stupid forever. At the time, however, Neanderthals were largely misunderstood, and many believed they were unintelligent and lacked the ability to draw, use tools, or engage in complex behaviors. Modern research has debunked these assumptions. We now know Neanderthals were skilled toolmakers, adept hunters and caregivers who looked after the sick and elderly. They may have even spoken a form of language in breeding among Neanderthals. Neanderthals frequently mated within their small populations, leading to significant inbreeding in 2014. Discovery of Neanderthals' toe bone from 20,000 years ago in the Altai Mountains of Siberia revealed that the individual's parents were closely related, potentially as siblings, first cousins, or even an uncle and niece. Other Neanderthal remains, such as a 50,000-year-old skeleton from Vindar Cave in Croatia and 13 additional skeletons from El Sedan Cave in Spain, further confirmed this trend of interbreeding. Genetic analyses revealed that many of these individuals were closely related. The inbreeding had significant biological consequences. Many Neanderthals exhibited skeletal abnormalities such as misshapen kneecaps, malformed vertebrae, and delayed loss of baby teeth. These issues likely made them less healthy and less fertile, which could have contributed to their eventual extinction. Interestingly, when Neanderthals interbred with early Homo sapiens, some of their genetic traits, including potentially harmful ones, were passed down to modern humans. Although these genes have mostly become inactive over time, traces of them still exist in some people today. Cannibalism among Neanderthals is evidence that Neanderthals sometimes practiced cannibalism, consuming the flesh of their own kind. Researchers studying the remains of 5 Neanderthals from 40,000 years ago found that their bones have been fractured in ways consistent with butchery, similar to the treatment of animal bones after hunting. While the reasons for this behavior remain unclear, some scientists hypothesize that Neanderthals consumed marrow from their kin's bones to extract nutrients during times of scarcity. Others suggest that cannibalism may have had cultural or ritualistic motivations. Still others propose it might have been opportunistic, with Neanderthals eating individuals who had already dead predators, and survival Neanderthals faced constant threats from predators, including large carnivores and possibly early humans. Fossil evidence supports this, such as bite marks from large predators on the Neanderthals' remains. One particularly striking example: the fossilized bone of a Neanderthal child found in a Polish cave that showed signs of having been consumed by a large bird. The bone had passed through the bird's digestive system, although it is unclear whether the bird hunted the child or scavenged its remains. These predators lived in close proximity to Neanderthals, competing for resources and often sharing caves. As a result, conflicts were likely common, and Neanderthals had to be vigilant to avoid becoming prey. Neanderthals' burial practices. In 1908, 2 archaeologists discovered the 50,000-year-old remains of Neanderthals in Chapel Auxiliaire Saints, France. The remains were found in what appeared to be a deliberate burial site. Initially, the idea of Neanderthals burying their dead was met with skepticism. However, continued research has strengthened the claim, suggesting that Neanderthals practiced burial rituals similar to early Homo sapiens. These burials provide evidence of symbolic thinking and cultural practices among them and challenge the outdated view of them as primitive and unrefined. In 1999, archaeologists revisited a notable site, and in 2012 a team of researchers from New York University led by William Renew conclusively established that Neanderthal had indeed been buried at the location. Since then, over 20 other sites across Europe have been discovered containing the remains of Neanderthals buried beneath the ground. The burials were often performed hastily, likely to protect the bodies from scavengers. This practice supports the idea that Neanderthals cared for their sick and elderly. For instance, the Neanderthal found in the French cave showed evidence of bone deformities and had lost a significant number of teeth. Given their apparent lack of concern for the deceased, it seems unlikely they would have buried the dead without a sense of care or purpose. It is not clear when the line of Neanderthals split from that of modern humans. Studies have produced various dates ranging from 315,000 to more than 800,000 years ago. The date of the divergence of the Neanderthals from their ancestor Ages is also unclear. The oldest potential Neanderthal bones date to 430,000 years ago, but the classification remains uncertain. Neanderthals are known from numerous fossils, especially from after 130,000 years ago. The reasons for Neanderthal extinction are disputed. Theories for their extinction include demographic factors such as small population size and inbreeding, competitive replacement, interbreeding and assimilation with modern humans, change of climate, disease, or a combination of these factors. Neanderthals lived in a high-stress environment with high trauma rates, and about 80% died before the age of 40. The total population of Neanderthals remained low, and interbreeding with humans tended toward a loss of Neanderthal genes over time. They lacked effective long-distance networks. Despite this, there is evidence of regional cultures and regular communication between communities, possibly moving between caves. Seasonally, for much of the early 20th century, European researchers depicted Neanderthal tales as primitive, unintelligent, and brutish, although knowledge and perception of them have markedly changed. Since then, in the scientific community, the image of the unevolved caveman archetype remains prevalent in popular culture. In truth, Neanderthal technology was quite sophisticated. It includes the Mysterian stone tool industry as well as the abilities to create fire and build huts to cook food, keep warm, and defend themselves from animals, placing it at the center of their homes. Make adhesive birch bark tar. Craft at least simple clothes similar to blankets and ponchos. Weave. Go seafaring through the Mediterranean, and make use of medicinal plants to treat severe injuries. Store food and use various cooking techniques such as roasting, boiling, and smoking meals consumed a wide array of food, mainly hoofed mammals but also plants, small mammals, birds, and aquatic and marine resources. Although they were probably apex predators, they still competed with cave lions, cave hyenas, and other large predators. A number of examples of symbolic thought and Paleolithic art have been inconclusively attributed to Neanderthals, namely possible ornaments made from bird claws and feathers, shell collections of unusual objects, including crystals and fossils, engravings of music production are possibly indicated by the diva bab flute and Spanish cave paintings, contentiously dated to before 65,000 years ago. Some claims of religious beliefs have been made. Neanderthals were likely capable of speech, possibly articulate, although the complexity of their language is not known compared with modern humans. Neanderthals had a more robust build and proportionally shorter limbs. Researchers often explain these features as adaptations to conserve heat in a cold climate, but they may also have been adaptations for sprinting in the warmer forested landscape that Neanderthals often inhabited. They had cold-specific adaptations, such as specialized fat storage and an enlarged nose to warm air, although the nose could have been caused by genetic drift. Average Neanderthals men stood around 165 centimeters, 5 feet 5, and women 153 centimeters, 5'0", tall, similar to pre-industrial modern Europeans. The brain cases of Neanderthals, men and women, averaged about 1,600 cubic cm and 1,300 cubic cm, respectively, which is considerably larger than the modern human average. 1,260 cubic cm and 1,130 cubic cm, respectively. The Neanderthal skull was more elongated, and the brain had smaller parietal lobes and cerebellum but larger temporal, occipital, and orbitofrontal regions. The 2010 Neanderthal Genome Project's draft report presented evidence for interbreeding between Neanderthals and modern humans. It possibly occurred 316,000 to 29,000 years ago, but more likely 100,000 years ago and again 65,000 years ago. Neanderthals also appeared to have interbred with Denisovans, a different group of archaic humans. In Siberia, they have around 1 to 4% of the genomes of the indigenous Australians and Melanesians of Urans. Native Americans and North Africans are of Neanderthal ancestry, while most inhabitants of sub-Saharan Africa have around 0.3% of Neanderthal genes, save possible traces from early sapiens Neanderthal gene flow and/or more recent back migration of Eurasians to Africa. In all, about 20% of distinctly Neanderthal gene variants survive in modern humans, although many of the gene variants inherited from Neanderthals may have been detrimental and selected out. Neanderthal introgression appears to have affected the modern human immune system and is also implicated in several other biological functions and structures, but a large portion appears to be non-coding DNA. Neanderthals are named after the Neander Valley in which the first identified specimen was found. The valley was spelled Nandal, and the species was spelled Nandala in German until the spelling reform of 1901. The spelling Nandal for the species is occasionally seen in English, even in scientific publications, but the scientific name, H. nandalensis, is always spelled with th according to the principle of priority. The vernacular name of the species in German is always Neanderthaler, an inhabitant of the Ninde Valley, whereas Ninde always refers to the valley itself, which was named after the late 17th century German theologian and hymn writer, Joachim Ninde, who often visited the area. His name in turn means new man, being a learned Grez of the German surname Neumann. Nandal can be pronounced using the T as in the N Latin letter NDL or the standard English pronunciation of T with the fricative theta as N Latin NDL. The latter pronunciation, nevertheless, has no basis in the original German word, which is pronounced always with a T regardless of the historical spelling. Nandal 1. The type specimen was known as the Nandal cranium or Nandal skull in anthropological literature, and the individual reconstructed on the basis of the skull was occasionally called the Nandal man. The binomial name Homo nandalensis extending the name Nandal man from the individual specimen to the entire species, and formally recognizing it as distinct from humans, was first proposed by Irish geologist William King in a paper read to the 33rd British Science Association in 1863. However, in 1864 he recommended that Neanderthals and modern humans be classified in different genera as he compared the Neanderthal brain case to that of a chimpanzee, and argued that they were incapable of moralizing and conceptualizing. The first Neanderthal remains, a skull, were discovered in 1829 by Dutch-Belgian prehistorian Philip E. Charles Scharling in the Grotsdenis, Belgium. He concluded that these poorly developed human remains must have been buried at the same time and by the same causes as the coexisting remains of extinct animal species in 1848. Later, one from Forbes Quarry was presented to the Jalter Scientific Society by their secretary, Lieutenant Edmund Henry Rene Flint, but was thought to be a modern human skull in 1856. Local schoolteacher Johann Karl Fuhl recognized bones from Kleinfeld in Valley Nandal. The holotype specimen, as distinct from modern humans, was given to German anthropologist Hermann Schaffhausen to study in 1857. It comprised the cranium, thigh bones, right arm, left humerus, and left ilium hip bone, part of the right shoulder blade, and pieces of the ribs. Following Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species, Fuhlrott and Schaffhausen argued the bones represented an ancient modern human form. Schaffhausen, a social Darwinist, believed that humans linearly progressed from savage to civilized and so concluded that Neanderthals were barbarous cave dwellers. Pathologist Rudolf Virchow argued against defining new species based on only a single find. In 1872, Virchow erroneously interpreted Nandal characteristics as evidence of senility disease and malformation instead of archaic, which stalled Neanderthal research until the end of the century. By the early 20th century, numerous other Neanderthal discoveries were made, establishing H. nandalensis as a legitimate species. The most influential specimen was El Chapel Auxiliary Saints. The old man from El Chapel Auxiliary Saints, France, French paleontologist Marcel Lindblay, authored several publications, among the first to establish paleontology as a science, detailing the specimen but reconstructing him as slouching, ape-like, and only remotely related to modern humans. The 1912 discovery of Piltdown Man, a hoax appearing much more similar to modern humans than the Neanderthals, was used as evidence that multiple different and unrelated branches of primitive humans existed and supported Bav's reconstruction of H. neanderlensis as a far distant relative and an evolutionary dead end, fueling the popular image of Neanderthals as barbarous, slouching, club-wielding primitives. This image was reproduced for several decades and popularized in science fiction works such as the 1911 The Quest for Fire by J. H. Rossny and the 1927 The Grizzly Folk by H. G. Wells, in which they are depicted as monsters in 1911. Scottish anthropologist Arthur Keith reconstructed La Chapelle aux Saints. One is an immediate precursor to modern humans sitting next to a fire, producing tools, wearing a necklace, and having a more human-like posture, but this failed to garner much scientific rapport, and Keith later abandoned his thesis in 1915 by the middle of the century, based on the exposure of Piltdown. Man is a hoax, as well as a re-examination of Chapel Auxiliary Saints I, who had osteoarthritis, which caused slouching in life, and new discoveries in the scientific community began to rework its understanding of Neanderthals' tales. Ideas such as Neanderthals' behavior, intelligence, and culture were being discussed, and a more human-like image of them emerged. In 1939, American anthropologist Carlton reconstructed a Neanderthal in a modern business suit and had to emphasize that they would be more or less indistinguishable from modern humans had they survived into the present. William Golding's 1955 novel The Inheritors depicts Neanderthals as much more emotional and civilized. However, Bay's image continued to influence works until the 1960s. In modern-day Neanderthal reconstructions, often very human-like, hybridization between Neanderthals and early modern humans had been suggested early on, such as by English anthropologist Thomas Huxley in 1890, Danish ethnographer Hans Petersen in 1907, and in the early 2000s, supposed hybrid specimens were discovered, Leger Velo 1 and Muiri 1. However, similar anatomy could also have been caused by adapting to a similar environment rather than inbreeding. Neanderthal admixture was found to be present in modern populations in 2010 with the mapping of the first Neanderthal genome sequence. This was based on 3 specimens in Vindar Cave, Croatia, which contained almost 4% archaic DNA, allowing for near-complete sequencing of the genome. However, there was approximately 1 error for every 200 base pairs, based on the implausibly high mutation rate, probably due to the preservation of the sample in 2012. British-American geneticist Graham Coop hypothesized that they instead found evidence of a different archaic human species interbreeding with modern humans, which was disproven in 2013 by the sequencing of high-quality Neanderthal genomes preserved in a toe bone from Denova Cave, Siberia, reveals that Neanderthals are hominids. In the genus Homo, humans are generally classified as a distinct species, H. neanderthalensis, although sometimes considered a subspecies of modern humans as Homo sapiens neanderthalensis. This would necessitate the classification of modern humans as H. sapiens. A large part of the controversy stems from the vagueness of the term species, as it is generally used to distinguish 2 genetically isolated populations, but admixture between modern humans and Neanderthals is known to have occurred. However, the absence of Neanderthal-derived patrilineal Y chromosomes and matrilineal mitochondrial DNA, mtDNA, in modern humans, along with the underrepresentation of Neanderthal X chromosome DNA, could imply reduced fertility or frequent sterility of some hybrid crosses, representing a partial biological reproductive barrier between the groups and therefore species distinction. In 2014, geneticist Parbo summarized the controversy, describing such taxonomic wars as unresolvable since there is no definition of species perfectly describing the case. Neanderthals are thought to have been more closely related to Denisovans than to modern humans. Likewise, Neanderthals and Denisovans share a more recent last common ancestor, LCA, than modern humans based on nuclear DNA. However, Neanderthals and modern humans share a more recent mitochondrial LCA, observable by studying mtDNA and Y chromosome LCA. This likely resulted from an interbreeding event subsequent to the Neanderthal-Denisovan split. This involved either ingression coming from an unknown archaic human into Denisovans or introgression from an earlier unidentified modern human wave from Africa into Niels. The fact that the mtDNA of a 430,000-year-old early Neanderthal, archaic humans from Cima de los Huesos in Spain, are more closely related to those of Denisovans than to other Neanderthals or modern humans. This has been cited as evidence in favor of the latter hypothesis. Largely thought that H. heidelbensis was the last common ancestor of Neanderthal Denisovans and modern humans before populations became isolated in Europe, Asia and Africa, respectively. The taxonomic distinction between heidelbensis and Neanderthals is mostly based on a fossil gap in Europe between 243,000 years ago during marine isotope stage 8. Neanderthals, by convention, are fossils that date to after this gap. DNA from archaic humans from the 430,000-year-old Cima de los Huesos site in Spain indicates that they are more closely related to Neanderthals than to Denisovans, indicating that the split between Neanderthals and the Neands must predate this time. The 400,000-year-old Aurora III skull may also represent an early member of the Neanderthal line. It is possible that gene flow between Western Europe and Africa during the Middle Pleistocene may have obscured Neanderthal characteristics in some Middle Pan-European homin specimens, such as those from Soprano, Italy and CEO Gorge, Serbia, but the fossil record is much more complete from 130,000 years ago onwards. And specimens from this period make up the bulk of known Neanderthal skeletons. Dental remains from the Italian Vogliano and Fontana Ruio sites indicate that Neanderthal dental features had evolved by around 450 to 430,000 years ago during the Middle Pleistocene. There are two main hypotheses regarding the evolution of Neanderthals following the Neanderthal-human split. Two-phase and accretion two-phase argue that a single major environmental event, such as the Sol glaciation, which caused European Homo heidelbergensis to increase rapidly in body size and robustness as well as undergoing a lengthening of the head. Phase 1, which then led to other changes in the skull anatomy. Phase 2, however, Neanderthal anatomy may not have been driven entirely by adapting to cold weather. Accretion holds that Neanderthals slowly evolved over time from the ancestral Homo heidelbergensis divided into 4 stages. Paleomagnetic Elster glaciation painless Moss 11 to 9 Holstein into glacial early Neanderthals Ms 7 to 5 Sale glaciation Iman and classic Neanderthal Moss 4 to 3 W glaciation. Numerous dates for the Neanderthal split have been suggested. The one from around 250,000 years ago cites H. helmi as being the last common ancestor, and the split is associated with the Levallois technique of making stone tools. The date of about 400,000 years ago uses Homo heidelbergensis as the LCA. Estimates of 600,000 years ago assumed that H. renus was the LCA, which split off into modern human lineage and the H. holobensis lineage. 800,000 years ago, H. antecessor was the LCA, but different variations of this model would push the date back to 1 million years ago. However, a 2020 analysis of H. anticore enamel the proteome suggests that H. antecessor is related but not a direct ancestor. DNA studies have yielded various results for the Neanderthal-human divergence time, such as 538 to 315, 553 to 321, 565 to 53, 654 to 475, 690 to 550, 765 to 550, 741 to 37, and 800 to 520,000 years ago, and a dental analysis concluded before 800,000 years ago. Neanderthals and Denisovans are more closely related to each other than they are to modern humans, meaning the Neanderthals-the Denisovan split occurred after their split with modern humans. Assuming a mutation rate of 1*10.9 or 0.5*10.9 per base pair BP per year, the Neanderthal-Denon split occurred around either 236 to 190,000 or 473 to 381,000 years ago, respectively. 92 using 1.1*108 per generation with a new generation every 29 years. The time is 744,000 years ago. Using 5*1010 nucleotide sites per year, it is 616,000 years ago using the latter dates. The split had likely already occurred by the time hominins spread out across Europe, and unique Neanderthal features had begun evolving by 600 to 500,000 years ago before splitting. Neanderthal Denisovans, or Neandophans, migrating out of Africa into Europe, apparently interbred with an unidentified super-archaic human species that were already present there. These super-archaics were the descendants of a very early migration out of Africa around 1.9 Maya pre and early 130,000 years ago and are poorly known and come mostly from Western European sites from 130,000 years ago onwards. The quality of the fossil record increases dramatically with classic Neanderthals, who are recorded from Western, Central, Eastern, and Mediterranean Europe, as well as Southwest, Central, and Northern Asia, up to the Alai Mountains in southern Siberia. Pre- and early Neanderthals, on the other hand, seem to have continuously occupied only France, Spain and Italy, although some appear to have moved out of this core area to form temporary settlements eastward, although without leaving Europe nonetheless. southwestern France has the highest density of sites for prehistoric early and classic Neanderthals. The Neanderthals were the first human species to permanently occupy Europe, as the continent was only sporadically occupied by earlier humans. The southern must-find was recorded at Shak Cave, Levant. Reports of Neander from the North African Jabal How and How OFA have been identified as Homo sapiens. Their Easter presence is recorded at Denova Cave, Siberia, 85 degrees east, the southeast Chinese Maber Man. A skull shares several physical attributes with Neanderthals, although these may be the result of convergent evolution rather than Neanderthals extending their range to the Pacific Ocean. The northernmost bound is generally accepted to have been 55 degrees north, with unambiguous sites known between 50 and 53 degrees north, although this is difficult to assess because glial advances destroy most human remains, and paleoanthropologists try to kill Berg Nelson has argued that a lack of evidence of southern Scandinavian occupation is at least partly due to the former explanation and a lack of research in the area. Middle Paleolithic artifacts have been found up to 60 degrees north on the Russian plains, but these are more likely attributed to modern humans. A 2017 study claimed the presence of Homo at the 130,000-year-old Californian CTI Mosteron site in North America, but this is largely considered implausible. It is unknown how the rapidly fluctuating climate of the last glacial period and Danard-Osar events impacted Neanderthals, as warming periods would produce more favorable temperatures but encourage forest growth and deter megafauna, whereas frigid periods would produce the opposite. That's it for today. Remember to support our channel. Please subscribe.